thank you so much for taking the time to sit down. Before this, I watched your video where you talked about how you got into the hobby, which was a really wonderful video, actually, because I think a lot of people, when they stumble upon your channel, it's really nice to see just like, wow, someone's so passionate about, a pretty niche section of gaming, right? Because
yes,
a lot of people are into video games and such, but the anime specific and JRPG section of it is so niche that it's really cool to see someone dive into it so deep.
Yeah, I assume you're referring to my video, How I Got Into Gaming.
Correct.
That's the funny thing about that video is that I almost didn't make it, and I'd had long-time subscribers who know me quite well by now, asking for a very long time, for years, actually saying, Britta, will you tell us how you got into gaming? And I always said, well, that's such a personal story and it's bound up with, a very problematic period in my life. I wasn't really comfortable talking about it. And so I said, just leave it. And if I ever feel the time is right, I'll do it. And at some point, it just suddenly clicked, and I just sat down and I put up the camera, and in one take, I just talked about it. And I'd only meant that video really for the people already on my channel who sort of knew my background a bit, and I always assumed it would only have a very limited appeal, really, because who wants to listen to an old woman talk about how she got into video games? That just seemed unlikely to me. So I did it very much for my long-time supporters. That's how I saw it, and that's how I spoke in the video. And when people started pouring in, and you know what it's like when views spike a bit, YouTube picks it up in the algorithm, and it just went berserk, really. And I had a lot of new people coming in, and on the whole the response has been remarkably positive. So yeah, that was a bit of an unusual video, really, but it has also been helpful to explain to people. The thing that personally always surprises me is people saying, oh, this is so niche what you're into, Britta. But to me, it isn't niche at all. I always think, why are people not into anime? I don't understand it. To me, when I started gaming, it was, I don't know whether it was chance or what, but I certainly had a friend who helped me in the very early days, and he sort of nudged me a bit towards JRPGs. And the moment I started playing Japanese games, I just felt at home. And that's really what you look for in any hobby. You just feel that this is my thing, I felt. And I've explored many other genres and also Western RPGs, and I like them all, but the Japanese games and in particular the anime style JRPGs are my big favorite. So to me, this is a big world, and it's incredibly important. And to have it called niche is kind of odd because it occupies my life.
Well, I'm the same way. I've been, very much into anime and that sector, for pretty much, like 15, 20 years,
Yes.
So, but I think, nowadays it's definitely gained much more traction and popularity. Like, kids these days can just watch, anime streaming online, it's much more accessible, which is wonderful.
Yes, it is. Yeah. I mean,
And,
it's on Netflix, you know.
Right, yeah. It's in theaters, you know. It's really great. One thing I really loved about the video was the way you sort of described when you were first getting into the hobby of gaming in general, how you were kind of researching, like, oh, what's the history of games and what are the best games and what are people talking about? And I connected to that on personally because that's how I always dive into my new hobbies. Like for me, tabletop board games are a big hobby of mine.
Yes, I noticed.
So right. And that started maybe about at this point maybe 8-9 years ago, and I just dove in, and I've played, you know, over 1,000 games now, and I have a extensive collection, and so I really connected to your enthusiasm for this new hobby. Now, before you got into gaming, did you have any exposure at all to anime or JRPGs at all, like prior?
No, because, of course, video games didn't exist when I was young. And because I live in New Zealand, you know, we're a pretty small place, and it can take quite some time, many years, for certain trends to filter through. And while there is an anime community in New Zealand, I think it's pretty small. And what's available here is very, very limited. So you wouldn't just stumble across it, you know, walking through your local shopping mall, seeing something in a shop window, or just walking around talking to people. They wouldn't just say, oh, I've been watching an anime lately. It's highly unlikely. So I think I was trying to actually think back to that because I had a feeling you might ask me that. I can only track it back to us watching the first ever anime movie we saw, and I think that must have been Spirited Away. So that would be just over 10 years ago, I think. So Studio Ghibli has had a huge impact on us, and that's when suddenly we were just blown away by it. It just opened up a whole new world to us that we didn't really previously know existed. Yeah.
Does your husband share any of your enthusiasm for the anime?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Yes, he does. I mean, he sort of because we try to share, you know, pretty much everything, and he at first I wasn't sure whether he would like it, but Studio Ghibli is such an easy introduction for anyone who's never been exposed to this, to Japanese culture and anime, and he just like me, it was just like he took to it like a duck to water, really. So we now watch anime every day. We try to make sure we have one session, even if it's a short one, with an episode of anime. And we often feel that if we go back to mainstream entertainment, like watching something on Netflix, you know, that it often feels quite shallow in comparison. Because I'm always amazed at some, you know, if you look closely at the depth of themes and topics that are being aired in anime. So it's we miss it when we don't have it. So yes, we try to watch anime regularly, and it's always a highlight of my day, I have to say.
What have you been watching recently?
We have been watching Naoki Urasawa's Monster.
I love, that's one of my favorite shows of all time. Are you enjoying it?
We are. I bought it as a DVD set, and the DVD went on the blink on the penultimate episode. So, we've got the final episode to go, and we'll be watching that online. So it's bar the last episode, we're finished, and it's been an absolutely incredible ride. We never ever, because the 74 episodes is quite long, we never ever said, oh, we're tired of this, we might watch something else, or let's flag it away, or anything like that. No, absolutely not. We just watched it every day. It's something
fantastic show.
It's absolutely amazing. And to me, there's all sorts of other issues because it's set in Germany. And of course, I grew up in Germany. And in fact, my husband and I spent most of the years that the anime covers in the 1980s, we spent in Germany. So I'm very familiar with the environments, the culture, everything around that period of the mid-1980s in Germany.
Sure.
So there's a lot of, and not just nostalgia for me, because there are all sorts of weird issues, because Monster is a completely Japanese story that happens to be set in Germany, and for reason understandable, because German history provides such an extraordinary set of circumstances leading up finally to reunification in 1989, that he used all those elements very, very well and to great effect. But to me, there's a sort of weird dissonance in that you see supposedly German people in the anime who are not German at all, to me, because they're completely Japanese. And I had to get over that in, the first few episodes, I constantly felt kind of odd, like I was, what kind of universe is this? Until I accepted this is a Japanese story, and, you got to look at it that way. But he uses a lot of themes from the wartime and post-war history, which, if you're a bit of a history buff or familiar with German history, I think you'd get even more out of it. Let's put it like that.
I see.
So there are layers and layers within that story. Very deep.
Have you read any of his other work?
No, Monster was our first exposure to him. Since then, I've bought a book of his short stories, and I'm thinking of getting. I have. For me here in New Zealand, it can be really, really difficult getting hold of manga in particular, especially older ones. So they're usually, sold out long ago and nobody imports them, so I have to import them. It can get very difficult, but I managed to finally get hold of the first volume of his 20th Century Boys, which has been highly recommended to me by so many people. So
it's very good.
Yeah, I bet it is. I'm really looking forward to it. Yes. So it's great discovering authors like that, and then being able to, delve into their work. I'm very lucky that one of my other favorite authors, Rumiko Takahashi, has written such a lot. So I'm really going overboard on that. I've ordered a lot of her manga stories, and I love her. I just love her. Do
you have a favorite work by Rumiko Takahashi?
I couldn't say, because I've really only... you have to remember, I only discovered, in inverted commas, manga just before Christmas.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay.
I never I mean, I'd never seen a manga before. I didn't know how to read it. It was all, another completely new experience, a bit similar to video games. I always thought, no, I'm not going to go there. People used to ask me, do you read any manga, Britta? And I said, look, I've got enough to do with my video games and watching anime. That's enough for a 70-year-old lady. And I thought I can't cope with that as well. But as it turned out, I had to, because we were watching The Promised Neverland, and I think it's a fantastic first season, that anime. Absolutely outstanding. Right. And then we watched the second season, and I thought, no, this won't do. This won't do.
Sure.
I'm sorry, no. And I thought, I really have to read the manga. And I thought, only that one, nothing else. I only need that one.
Right.
So I ordered it and I started reading, and I'm still reading it. It's fantastic. And, it got its hooks into me, and I thought, I wonder what some other manga like. Well, it snowballed from there, so I'm just madly trying to catch up on a lot of things. But
as it always does, right?
Yeah,
with all these, video games, anime, manga, it gets its teeth into you, and then you just become obsessed. I'm
reading Rinne at the moment by Rumiko Takahashi, and that is certainly a favorite with me. But I've got her other books here as well. So Maison Ikoku is really incredibly charming.
I love that one.
It's absolutely charming. It's wonderful. And I've got the Mermaid book as well, but haven't started it yet. So, I've got a good supply sitting here awaiting my reading pleasure. And a recent discovery has been Atelier Witch Hat.
Oh, yes, that's a great one, too. Yeah. The art is beautiful in that one.
It's absolutely amazing. I just fell in love with it from the first page onward. And I'm sitting here, I have to wait now between 3 and 5 months for any manga to arrive that I order. It takes that long now. We're having awful supply problems due to the whole COVID situation. So I have to be patient, which means it's a good thing I've got other manga piled up I can read in between.
Sure. Now going back to, let's say the start of the channel, what prompted you to, I've had this hobby, but now I want to maybe share it with other people. What kind of led to that development?
It was exactly that, sharing it with a few other people. So one day I was playing a game, a small indie game, and I thought, I'm really enjoying it, and I hadn't heard anybody else playing it, so I thought I'll just show some of my friends, and because it's so easy on the PlayStation 4 just to hit the record button, I just uploaded a few short sequences of gameplay with a bit of commentary, and it was just meant for, maybe a dozen, 2 dozen people I knew, and I said, hey, look, I've uploaded this, have a look at this, I think it's quite interesting. And that was really it. I didn't think any further than that. And it was, I noticed that there were more views than there were friends who I had notified. So I thought, a few people stumbled across it and found it interesting. That's nice. But I never thought further than that. And it was several months later when I I bought a second-hand Vita, which I imported from Japan, and that was the first time I'd taken that route. And I thought, because I was, for me, the big thing was Twitter and Vita Island, because that was my home base, so to speak. And I just wanted to share it with Vita Island. So I propped up my old phone with the 1 megapixel camera and just filmed myself for a few minutes unboxing and just commenting on the Vita I'd received from Japan. And then I told people on Twitter, Vita Island, if you're interested, have a look. I've got a secondhand Vita from Japan. And that was the one that really got things going, because the Vita community is very tight-knit. So, there is an instant interested body of people there. And I noticed after a few weeks that it had piled up quite a lot of views that I was really surprised about, and people started leaving comments and saying this was really helpful, etc. And I thought, this is fun, you can share stuff with people. And that's what it was. And, that's what it still is. It hasn't changed for me. It's never been about anything else but what I love about video games and what I like to share.
Yeah. It's I guess sort of a similar mentality for me with, my channel, right? Which I never anticipated any attention whatsoever, but for me it's always just been a collection of just, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I like to do, I do enjoy that as well, just sharing things, my opinions, and that, and sort of fostering a community, I think can be very, very rewarding. Now first off, I have to ask this because my good friend of mine, who is editing this podcast, had a question for you, because you've played the Persona games, correct?
I do, yes.
Have you played 3 through 5?
Yes, I've played one. The only one I haven't played much at all is 2.
I see.
I've played 3, 4, and 5. Yes, correct.
He wants to know your favorite characters from each title. Who are your favorite characters?
I can't really answer that. I mean, I get that question a lot. And I always say that it would be really hard for me to pick just one, because for me what is important about the game is the whole cast of characters and how they all, the writing has to be not just good for one character and maybe middling for the rest. That's not gonna work. It's got to be great for all of them. And
so for you, it's more about the chemistry of the whole group.
Yes, I suppose I need to explain a bit, because I used to be a fiction writer, a long time ago. So I have writing experience. I have training. I have credentials. I even used to teach online fiction writing. I look at it possibly a bit differently, from how a fan looks at it, who says, oh my God, I really identify with this character, and they, living through the game, very much through maybe that one character. And I always look at it very differently. I look at the dynamics going on all the time between the characters.
I see.
So even if I don't like a character because of who they are, I always admire them because of how well written they are. So my favorite cast probably still is Persona 4. But Persona 3 is also, I mean, it's impossible because they're all different, but they all get their hooks into you. Yeah. So,
sure.
I had an early liking for Chie in Persona 4, and I still Yeah, because she just bounces back, and whenever things get difficult, she just tends to cheer me up, with her attitude. Right. Very straightforward, very honest. And I really like that. But I like all the others as well, so I'm sorry. I've consistently said I'm not picking a favorite, and I'm sticking with that because the games are just too good for that, I feel.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is there a game for you that has just a cast of characters that you really love? Like one of your, just the most enjoyable casts of characters to see interact with each other?
I'm very fond of the Tales games, and there are quite a few there where I really enjoy the cast. And I think I mentioned it in my video, the very first Tales game I played, Grace's F. I still have very fond memories of that cast. And the one I'm playing at the moment is promising to be very good in that department too. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting to know the cast in the most recent Tales game. Yeah.
In Arise?
Correct. Yeah.
Nice. Going back to the channel, for the editing of the channel, do you do the editing or do you have somebody else do the editing for your videos?
I wish I had someone who would do the editing for me. It drives me completely around the bend, and I just fiddle with it forever. Look, I'm just a one-person outfit, I do everything, and
sure,
there's nobody here who can help me. I'm sitting here in provincial New Zealand, and it's I had to learn painfully how to edit a video, and it started off with just learning how to trim bits off, but since then I've become quite obsessed with it to the extent that I hardly ever manage to finish a video because I'm always going back re-editing. That's not good. I need to get on top of that. Yeah. But I'm a great believer in that a video doesn't need to be perfect, and it doesn't need to look perfect. And in fact, I always strive for it. It should be natural, which means it can be imperfect, rather than a glossy surface that people can't connect to.
I see. Now, I like to give my guests the opportunity, if they'd like. Is there a question for me you'd like to ask, or a topic that you would like to bring up? And if not, that's fine. But I always like to offer it if you have had anything in mind.
No, I hadn't actually thought of any question as such.
Sure.
The only thing I would like to mention is that both Poodlepaw and I are huge fans of Kage.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes, because we started watching Ranking of Kings, and it was just like we just were submerged in it. We couldn't wait each day to watch another episode. It was just amazing, and we loved Kage from the first moment. And and Poodlepaw always said, "God, he does that voice really well." And I always said, "Funny, sounds a bit familiar, that voice." It took me a long time to actually have the presence of mind to check the voice acting, but Kage is a firm favorite with us, and honestly I can't wait for hopefully another season to arrive here in the West. Yeah, that would be awesome.
I'm so glad to hear that. Akage has definitely been one of my favorite characters I've ever played in my career.
Yeah.
Every episode is just a delight, and so I'm really glad that you're enjoying it. I also am hoping for a second season as well.
We'll have to see. These things take time. I read up a bit about the author and his background and how he got into writing Ranking of Kings, and it's all really fascinating. Yeah.
Right. From what I recall, I read an interview with him that because he kind of got into it, quote unquote, later in his life, and it was interesting because I think a lot of comparisons are drawn between Ranking of Kings and I'm sure you're familiar with like Mob Psycho 100 or are you familiar with Mob Psycho 100?
I've certainly heard the name and it's been recommended to me, but for some reason I can't access that anime here. That's an ongoing problem, regional differences. What's available in North America is absolutely astounding and confounding to us here. We're very limited in what's being shown here, and sometimes, I try to access an anime and it says, like on Crunchyroll, and it says, "Oh, sorry, we can't. We don't have the rights for your region. You can't watch this." So, and that's always disappointing. But there's not much I can do about that. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I bring it up because both manga are drawn in a way that's not a bad drawing, but maybe not like quote unquote up to standard of what you would expect from like a super polished manga, but the writing for both is really, really top notch. So it's very, I believe both of them started as web comics online. So it's really cool to see that, something that has the writing to back it up, even if the art isn't necessarily as polished as your typical manga, but getting such beautiful adaptations, in the animated form is really, really nice to see. And Ranking of Kings has definitely been, I think, one of the major hits of the season, which is great to see. Now, I guess going outside of the anime talk, you mentioned you lived in Germany for a bit. Have you lived anywhere else in your life? Like I don't know, what is your sort of history of like locations of where you've lived?
Yeah, well, I was born and raised in Germany.
Okay.
I moved to the UK and lived there for about 5 years. And then we came back to Germany for a stint. That was in the 1980s. And then we decided to make the big move, and we emigrated to New Zealand. And we've been here ever since, over 30 years.
And what was the decision to go to New Zealand specifically? What prompted that decision?
Well, that's actually, strangely enough, that's quite difficult. Looking back, for over 30 years back, I'd probably answer that differently than I would have done at the time. And while you'd like to think you make very rational decisions when you do something like this, that is not always necessarily the case, because your mood and your feelings about the state of the world at the time influence very much what you do. We knew we weren't totally happy about going back to the UK, so we said, well, people suggested to us, like, why don't you consider Australia, etc. And we said, yeah. So we decided, that was really a spur of the moment decision, to book a holiday for New Zealand, just traveling around. And we did that. I think it was we took a good time. It was like 4 weeks, and we traveled around a lot. And when we returned to Europe, we just said, Yeah, we miss New Zealand, and it sort of wormed its way into our affections. And we said, well, we haven't got many other options. Why don't we just try? And my husband applied for a job, several, and one of them turned out positive. And we said, well, this is it, how often do you get a chance like this? What do we do? And we've always liked a bit of adventure, and I have a great belief in sometimes just jumping into the water and just start paddling and seeing where you end up. Things can go wrong, and they have gone wrong, but they can also turn out in a good way. And it's all however it turns out, it's always a great experience. That's what I value. And we just said we're just going to take the plunge. What can possibly go wrong? And it was a funny time to do it, 1989. But since then, everybody said at the time, you are nuts. You're completely off your rocker. Nobody goes to New Zealand. It's the complete back end of the world. Nothing ever happens there. You will regret this. They told my husband, professional advice was, do not do it. So we thought, well, we're going to do it now. We're really going to do it now. And we did. Sure. And it was tough. It was pretty tough. But I wouldn't miss this experience for the world, honestly. And we've done things. Friends back in Europe said later, gosh, they said, we admire what you've done and the things you've seen and experienced, And suddenly, about 10 years or so ago, suddenly New Zealand became fashionable and everybody wanted to travel here. It became a big holiday destination, and I kept getting messages from all around the world. Oh, you live in New Zealand. How did you manage that? They wanted advice about how you can emigrate. And of course, it's become very difficult. You can't just arrive in New Zealand. It's not like I'm glad we did it when we did it, because we could still do it the normal way, just apply for a job and come here, and all we had to do was pack up our belongings and stuff it all in a container that went on a big freighter for months around the world, and pay for that, and that was a big expense, but nothing like what people have to do these days. So it's supposed to be getting easier in a global world, but I don't see that. I don't think things are getting easier at all. Anyway, we landed here, and people said, after a year or two, you probably have had enough. You will go back to Europe. They sort of expected that. You are citizens of the world. You're Europeans. You won't want to be stuck here in New Zealand. But we have been pretty happy being stuck here in New Zealand. Yeah. There's a few disadvantages, like not getting access easily to anime or manga, but I work my way around that. On the whole, nothing's ever perfect in life, but we've had a good life here in New Zealand, and we love it here, and we are, we're New Zealand citizens, and. Yeah, it was a good decision. I'm sure we could have made a different decision, and maybe that would have turned out well too. A lot of it has to do with how you approach something. You have to make the best of whatever you're given in life.
Yeah, I mean, now it's fashionable. I think a big part of it was definitely like, the Lord of the Rings films and all of that.
Yeah.
Actually, a friend of mine a couple years ago went there to be an extra in there's a new Lord of the Rings show that they are releasing. She was an extra, a hobbit actually,
yes,
in the background.
Yeah.
And she loved New Zealand. She was wanted to maybe stay. I find a lot of people unexpectedly, maybe like I've had friends go to like Korea, Japan, countries they've never been to before, but they just unexpectedly fall in love with a new country, a new place, and live there. And some of them just live there for and really find themselves happy, which is so I'm glad that it really worked out for you in the end. One thing I'm curious about, you mentioned you had a friend that sort of steered you towards JRPGs in the beginning. Was that friend like a long-time fan of the genre?
Yes, it was someone, because when I started trying out games, as I described in that video, I was pretty lost, of course, at first. I needed help. And at the time, we had in New Zealand only one or two like online forums where Kiwis gathered and talked about games. And I joined one of those forums and posted there. And they must have been rather surprised, but nobody ever said an unkind word or anything. It was great, really. And it was just a chance, how you meet people online. And I happened to meet this person very, very early on in the first days of my gaming adventure, and we've been friends ever since. And he was a bit of a mentor in the beginning. So I guess I might have been influenced by his likes and in gaming, but that wouldn't be enough. I mean, if I tried the games he liked and I didn't get along with them, well, I would have tried something else. It wasn't like that. It just happened that our interests and likes overlapped to an astonishing degree, and that was just lucky. But yeah, that was great for me to have someone who just supported me, and allowed me. He never said, "Oh, don't try this game," or he said, "Well, try and let me know what you think," and then we talked about it, and that was just the right approach for me. So, yeah, I feel I've always been lucky like that. I've been happy to talk to people, and I've always met people who've been, in return, kind and supportive, So, once again, it's all about attitude, I think. Yeah.
Sure. Now, I guess just some general questions for, I guess let's just start with, do you have I know you mentioned in your video, the hour-long video about getting into gaming, it was one of the Atelier games that was very important to you?
Yes, that's right.
Do you consider that your favorite game, or do you have do you have favorites?
Amongst the Atelier games, I would say it still stands out as a really big favourite to me. Yes, and I can never forget that particular history and that particular experience. It just colours everything for me about that game. People have since talked to me about the game's difficulty level with the alchemy, and I didn't even notice it at the time when I was playing it. But I get pretty obsessive about alchemy and crafting, so I never worry about pouring hours and hours into it. I'm retired. I can do that, Not everybody can, and I understand that. But they pointed out that the alchemy system is particularly tricky at times in that game. It suited me because it's what I call a more text-based approach. But I do understand that criticism, and the Atelier games have never ever been good at providing really in-depth guidance into their system. They just tell you a few of the basics, and then they say, well, be happy exploring, find out stuff for yourself. And yes, it's just a bit too big and complex for that. It helps if you're given at the right moment a bit more tutorial than what they provide. Yeah, but since Atelier's changed a lot, and the latest games, especially the Riser games, have completely revamped the system to make it that much more approachable and so much easier to do things than in the older games. But I still love the Atelier games on the PS3, and I think the Dusk trilogy is probably still overall my favorite of all of them. Yes.
Do you have a favorite anime?
It would have to be, I mean, that's another tough one, but it would probably have to be Made in Abyss.
Okay. And have you seen all of the movies and everything, or have you just seen the first season? Or
no, they showed it here. In New Zealand they sometimes break things up differently. It was I thought I'd seen 2 seasons of it, but it could just have been a very, the full season 1. I'm not quite sure.
I see.
So I think what's called season 2, the one, I think it's been released in Japan, would I be right? But it hasn't been localized yet. I haven't seen anything beyond what has been available here to us. Yeah. So no, I'm still waiting. Yeah. And I didn't watch the movies because they looked to me like mainly a recap of everything. So, but I may need to have another look at that. Yeah.
I see. And so with manga, that's been a recent development in hobbies. Are there any other hobbies or interests that you're interested in pursuing but like haven't done so yet? Anything that looks, potentially, fun to you that you haven't experienced yet? Like in terms of a new hobby?
Well, perhaps not hobbies so much. I mean, we have sort of hobbies, like we like going traveling in our camper van. I don't know whether that's a hobby, but it certainly is time out, and that's important. I'm big into classic movies, and I do talk quite a bit about that also on my channel, but in the text section of the channel, but I would have to say the only other, because I'm now at the stage of life where I'm looking at what can I still do. You've got to be realistic, and there's certain things like physically that I cannot do anymore like I used to. So I'm pretty housebound these days. But there's one thing I might want to return to, and that would then occupy all of my time, and that would be fiction writing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to wait for the right time. I don't know why, but I do everything like that, and I will know when the moment comes, just as I did with that video about how I got onto gaming. I know when the right moment comes, and then I might just retire, shut the door and devote myself to that. Yeah.
Yeah. it makes sense to just, do stuff when it feels right, when you want to do it the most. I think that's a very good attitude and approach to things like that.
Some people are really good with setting themselves goals and setting up a timeline and then sitting down and sticking to it. And I admire that approach enormously. But but I'm just not wired that way at all, and with me, everything has to go through inclination and instinct, and I take that route, and it either works or it doesn't. And if something doesn't work, I just step back and say, okay, the time's not right. I've learned that, it can take a long time for the right moment to arrive, and you've got to be patient. And that can be very difficult when you're younger in particular. But for me, it's a lot easier now. Yeah. So, that's the one thing I think I might still want to do. I've still got a few stories that have been left untold, and and I do love fiction above everything else.
Now, for in the game sphere, the anime sphere, manga sphere, are there any titles that you are looking forward to trying next? Like, what's on the horizon? What are you excited to for the next new things?
I've got a few new manga that are sort of arriving and that are piling up. And just today, I received the first volume of A Vagabond.
Oh, Vagabond is great.
Yeah,
yes.
I thought it would be. It's I very much follow the advice of subscribers on my channel and on Twitter followers, and most of them have been reading manga for most of their younger lives, and there is just a fund of knowledge and experience there, and I honestly haven't gone wrong so far with anything they have suggested. I'm very happy to do that. I've also got one volume called Otherworld Barbara. That's a bit...
Otherworld Barbara?
Yes, that's quite a classic one, and it looks beautiful. I'm looking forward to that. So a few more unusual ones, perhaps. Yeah. So no, I'm all set. I've got one here. Just a moment. By Naoki Urasawa, and it's called Asadora.
Yes, that's his newest one. It's very solid so far.
Yes, that's so. I've got the first volume of that here. That was suggested to me by Ray, who is the artist for my channel. He does the weekly drawing, which is highly popular. I always joke that people just come to my community section because they want to see Ray's latest drawing. But that is well-deserved praise. He does absolutely amazing work. So he suggested Asadora, so I've got that waiting. But please, anyone, feel free to send me your suggestions. I'm happy to have them all.
Would you like some suggestions from me right now?
I would not mind at all.
Now, I'm not sure what is easy to get for you in New Zealand, but just from what you've mentioned so far, have you read or watched, actually, there's a show now, Vinland Saga?
This has come up quite a bit, and I think I tried to watch it as an anime, and I must have looked at the first episode, and it just did not click with me.
I see.
But it keeps coming up, and I've got it on my list to check it as a manga. Maybe that will work better. I don't know.
I think that will work better because I think the manga is better, personally.
Yeah.
The anime is slightly different in how it starts, and I think the manga actually, how it presents the story, I think is the way to go.
Yeah.
So I'd be very curious to see what you thought of that one. I think that one's really solid. If you like Urasawa, I think Pluto, has that been recommended to you yet?
Not much, no. That is not so far on my horizon. So, but I have a feeling I will delve into everything he's done. Yeah.
Pluto is a shorter one. It's about 8 volumes, and it's an official adaptation by him of an Astro Boy story. But it's his take on it. It's a psychological sort of like it's very much in the same tone as Monster. So imagine, classic Astro Boy characters, but drawn in his style and with his storytelling, and so it's a really psychological horror drama. It's really great.
Yeah, you mentioned horror, and I have to mention I've just started reading Junji Ito.
I saw you've been reading Uzumaki, right?
Uzumaki, yeah. I've started it, and I literally have to ration myself. I haven't been emptying the dishwasher or cleaning the bathtub or anything because, I just sit there wanting to read that book. Yeah, it's completely got me in its grip. So I'm already thinking about what other ones to get when I finish that. Yeah, Tormie has been suggested to me.
Oh yes. Do you like slice of life stuff? More lighter, just about that kind of genre?
I do, but it's got to have something pulling me through, either the story or some really, really interesting characters. I've got one at the moment I'm reading in between, and it's called Hakume and Mikochi, and that's about it's called the subtitle is The Tiny Little Life in the Woods. So this is a slice of life of having a tiny little life in the woods, and it is completely charming and adorable and slightly odd at times, and yes. So to me, that's slice of life, or something like laid back camping, Eurocamp.
Oh yeah.
That would be slice of life.
Very charming.
That would be slice of life, wouldn't it? Yeah, and we do watch that in between. But I'm not good at starting one of those and going all the way through. I eat them as little snacks in between.
I see.
Yeah. Did you have one you wanted to recommend in particular?
Let's see. I'm literally just looking at my shelves right now.
I'm doing the same. I've got them all piled up.
Have you read or heard of A Bride's Story?
I haven't read it, but I know about it because a friend of mine on Twitter read it, and she showed me the cover images from the books, and that got me interested. And because I've got a background in social anthropology, those types of stories, especially set with tribal cultures, are always interesting to me. Yeah, and that looked very appealing. Yeah.
I think you would like that a lot. The author, she traveled to Central Asia herself and did a lot of studying of the culture. And she also did a manga called Emma, which is about Victorian England, which I have not read, but I hear is very good. But she clearly is very interested in 19th century history and. So if I feel like that would be very appealing to you.
Yes. I did have a look at that, but there was some problem getting the manga here in New Zealand. I often find that they might have just one or two of the later volumes still available, but the early ones, usually volume 1, 2, 3 with almost anything is just missing and
tough to come by.
Yeah. So I sometimes, if I'm lucky, I might spot it somewhere or go to a specialist retailer. I do that now, but it gets difficult. I have to import it with FedEx. So I have to be a bit selective, unfortunately, in what I get and how I do it. But I keep all these on my list, and I just keep looking around, and the day will come when I find it. I'm always hopeful.
You never know. I mean, even they just announced a manga that I've always been very interested in, called Yokohama Kaidashi Kiko, and that came out like 1994. It's never had an English manga release, and only this year did it finally, it's getting localized in English, which so it's like you never know, That is amazing. That is amazing. So I hope I manage to pick up the news when that comes out, because that's I do seem to like the older and classic ones. I seem to have a liking for them. Yeah, they seem to speak to me. Yeah. Apologies if I'm just barraging you with with recommendations.
I actually like being barraged. I'm a sponge, I just soak up everything that people throw my way. I'm always happy with that, yeah.
I've got a couple more manga to recommend, and then one anime, and then I promise I'll leave you alone for the time being. But have you read Delicious in Dungeon?
No, but it's only a few days ago that I came across it, and I tried looking at it, and I can't even remember whether it's an anime and a manga. Is that right?
No anime adaptation so far.
It's only a manga.
Just a manga.
Okay, I must have looked at the manga online at some details, and I was puzzled, but I sort of walked away. I didn't put it...
Do you know the premise?
It's got something to do with food. It sounded like a traditional a group of people going into a dungeon, and that is usually. I think that's why I must have looked at it, because I love just straightforward, stereotypical stories about parties of adventurers going into dungeons, because that's what I like doing in video games. I'm a dungeon crawler, so any of those stories I'm happy. There was one it's called Goblin Slayer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I loved that. I think that's why I must have looked at Delicious and Dungeon, but I couldn't wrap my head around what it was, so it sort of didn't register. You're telling me I need to go back and have another look at it, is that right?
So what Delicious in Dungeon is about is, you're right, it's a party of adventurers going into a dungeon, but what's great is that they are poor and can't afford supplies, so they have to start cooking the monsters that they encounter.
Okay.
And it's presented as almost like a gourmet food manga.
Okay.
It's a comedy.
Okay.
But so it's like, how do you cook? One of them is like, how do you cook living armor? Turns out you can cook living armor.
Okay.
And they just they have it almost broken down as like recipes. And,
yes.
One of the characters is horrified. She doesn't want to eat any of it, but then she tries it and she's like, oh, it tastes pretty good. But it's very charming.
But I'm just wondering, can you assure me that this is not a one-joke story?
Yes, because what happens is for the first maybe volume or so, it's it's kind of like a comedy, but there's also a because they're trying to save the main character's sister, who was captured.
Yeah.
And what happens is the world around them really starts to build up, and it can get pretty serious later on. So it's a really nice balance of like there's some really funny, like charming moments of the cooking, but there is definitely a deeper narrative of intrigue and suspense going on.
Yeah.
So absolutely, it's very, very good.
Okay. Okay, it goes on the list.
Okay. Have you read Full Metal Alchemist?
No, and I haven't seen the anime either. It's one of those big classic ones that has been in my anime queue forever, and I have to think very carefully about starting a new one that is very long and very deep, because I tend to watch them together with my husband. His time is limited. He's still working.
Sure.
So getting him to start something new and that big is, I've got to pick the right moment. If I pick the wrong moment and he walks off, then I'm left watching it on my own. So I was lucky when we started watching Hunter x Hunter, because that's a pretty big and long one, and we just went all the way through consistently. We never stopped watching it, and he absolutely adored it. So that was great. But I know I have to pick the right moment. So this is one of the probably few big ones that's still left on my anime watch list that we haven't watched yet.
I don't know if anyone's given you this spiel yet, but you should watch Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Has anyone given you this argument before?
No, I haven't really, because I know there is so much of Fullmetal Alchemist, and there's a lot of depth in it. It's a bit like the Fate universe, There is so much there that people become specialists, and that's when I start sort of rolling my eyes and backing out, because it can get too much at times, So
sure.
I just, if I want to watch something, I start at the beginning and I just see how I go, So
for Fullmetal Alchemist specifically, I think if you have access to it, the manga is the best way to experience it. It's really wonderful.
You say it's better than watching the anime.
I would say that's the best option.
Yeah.
And then if that's not available to you, there are two shows. There's Fullmetal Alchemist that was in 2003, and then there's Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, which was a remake of, and Brotherhood is the one that follows the manga's story. The original Fullmetal Alchemist in 2003 starts following the story, and then because it ran out of material, it completely diverges into what I think is a very inferior story.
Okay.
Whereas Brotherhood is you start from the beginning, and it goes through the whole manga from start to finish.
So in fact, that is the better option to start with, the Brotherhood.
That's generally the agreed upon.
Okay.
I mean, there are merits to the original, but I personally am not a fan. I think the original manga is the way to go, and Brotherhood is like a very good adaptation of the manga.
That would explain a lot, because I hadn't realized this before, so I'm very grateful that you explained this, because I know I have watched the first episode of the original Full Metal Alchemist anime. I've watched it, or parts of it, several times over the years, and I always thought, well, this looks like a great story, but I don't know why I never continued with it. As well though. So I will give the Brotherhood a try. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts if you do check it out. And then by the same author, there's a manga called Silver Spoon, which also has a great anime as well. It's about a high school boy who goes to a farming school and learns about farming, and it's it's extra interesting because the author grew up on a farm, so it's all very like in detail, like how it all works. It's very funny, very charming, and it's all about him sort of finding his way of like what does he want to do with his life and that kind of thing. It's very inspiring. So that's another great one.
That sounds very good and sounds like the sort of thing that my husband would enjoy too, so it would be easy to get into. Okay, no, fine. That's I see. I'm all set. Could you also please provide some spare hours in the day, like top me up to 28 or 30 hours per day, so I can watch and read all this? I'm already, it's great. It's great. I go to bed at night, I don't read manga at bedtime, but I go to bed and I think, what shall I read and watch tomorrow? And there's just the anticipation, and
that's great.
I think it's it's important that you look forward to every day you have.
Yes. I'll leave you with one final one, and then we'll wrap up. My favorite anime. I don't know if you'll have access to it in New Zealand, but maybe if you do. I know my friend in Australia had access to it, but it's a show called Chihaya Furu. I don't know if you've heard of this one.
I'm not sure. It doesn't ring a bell at the moment. If you can text me through the details on that. If it's available in Australia, because we usually share the same distribution channels with Australia, so it looks vaguely familiar. I'd have to check that.
Right.
Yes, I know I've come across that recently. But I need to look into that. Hopefully, yes, because as I said, we get a lot of stuff from the Australian distribution channels, like an outfit called Madman is based in Australia, and they and they do a lot of the both anime and manga distribution and provision. So
basically how the premise of that one is, it's about a high school girl who plays a Japanese card game called Karuta, which is a poetry-based reflex game where you have to hit verses of cards in poetry faster than your opponent. It's like a niche game in Japan.
Yes, I've watched the first episode. I remember it now.
Yeah?
I have watched the first episode, and it was...
what did you think of it?
I thought it was absolutely amazing.
That's great.
Yeah, I just love the whole detail about the card game and the interaction between the boy and the girl. But I can see this. That was just the first episode was just a little opening on this world. I can see there's just there's just so much more to come. So so that means I've got it sitting in my queue. As you can tell, I do look at a lot of anime. It's almost a daily routine with me that I might check one or two by just watching part of or the whole first episode, just to figure out, is this something I might want to watch in the future? And then, it either gets tagged yes or no in the queue. And I do that with a lot. And being a senior lady, I sometimes forget. But no, that brought back the instant memory. I was obviously really impressed with those. The cards just flying all over the place. It was just amazing. I loved it. Yeah.
I'm glad it left an impact on you. And if you ever are able, you should watch more, because it's really wonderful. Really just a beautiful show.
I promise I will.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for just taking the time. This was a really enjoyable conversation for me. I hope you also had a good time.
I had a lot of fun. Thank you very much. And who knows? We might be able to do it again in the future.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And you feel free at any time, DM me on Twitter or Discord, if you just want any more recommendations or just want to share,
Yes.
I love discussing and recommending things to people.
Yeah.
And would love to do more in the future.
Yes.
But before we wrap up, where can people find you and your channel?
It's really, I try to keep it simple. I'm FOOD4DOGS, and that's the name I use both for my YouTube channel and on Twitter. And that's it, really. That's all I do.
And if you haven't checked out her channel and or Twitter, it's great. So go check it out. And thank you very much for taking the time. This has been lovely.
Thank you. I really did enjoy it. Bye-bye.